And welcome everybody. I'd like to just say thanks a million to Glandor for supporting this and for all their support since the Speak Up Club started. The Speak Up Club originally began as an initiative to create a kind of safe space for workshops for women in business, particularly to practice public speaking. But over lockdown, I've been doing more webinars and they're very much open to everyone. And I'm delighted to see some guys here today as well. So you're very welcome. It isn't exclusively female anymore, but it was kind of the genesis of the Speak Up Club. So what we're going to do today is a little refresher course in public speaking. I think that over lockdown, we've very much been at home on our own, a lot of us. So getting back into the office is something that's maybe causing a little bit of anxiety for some people. And I know for certain from some of the kind of research into how people have been through lockdown, it's kind of come through to me that some people who are quite quiet have actually found maybe Zoom calls have been a comfortable place for them, where they don't speak up, but where they will be comfortable putting a question or a comment into the chat in a video call or online, something like that. So some people who found a comfortable place over lockdown, kind of engaging in that way in meetings and things, might be feeling a little bit anxious now about the thought of going back into a real life boardroom or something like that, or indeed giving a presentation. So we have a short little kind of lunchtimey webinar today. So we're going to try and do a whistle-stop tour through the highlights of Speak Up Club workshops. We obviously won't be doing any kind of workshop kind of things like games or kind of icebreaker things. You can all keep your cameras off and I'll just take you through some slides and hopefully it will give you a taster of what we do. And maybe someday soon we'll be back in the real world doing real life workshops where you can kind of get that sense of building on your voice and your comfortableness speaking in public. So with that, let's dive in. And just very quickly, what we're going to go through in this workshop or webinar, sorry, is kind of preparing yourself. So first of all, looking at how we know we're nervous and how we manage that, what the signs are, where they come from and how we deal with them. Then a little toolkit of things that are kind of handy tips and tricks that very much can help you just kind of fake it till you make it almost and make you look more confident. But I really do believe that things you do physically, your brain will start to believe. So starting to kind of integrate these things into your speaking will in fact kind of just become part of you essentially. And then you will just be more confident. It'll happen without you even realizing. And then on to the next kind of level of preparation is how to practice if you have something coming up like a presentation or a speech. And then a quick look at just on the day, a few little checklist things to do, and then a little action plan that you could take away yourselves. And I can send these slides around later as well, that you can just kind of tick through when you have something to prepare for and how to kind of keep practicing and rehearsing yourself. So preparing yourself firstly is thinking about anxiety, nervousness, where that comes from. And it's all really, really physical. It all happens from the amygdala in your brain, which is our ancient caveman fight or flight place. So it's basically the human brain hasn't much changed from caveman days. We're still scanning the horizon, looking for lions that are coming to eat us and preparing to run away. So our brain just sets off all of these chemicals, hormones that flood our systems and give us all these physical symptoms of fear. And that's telling us, run faster, you'll get eaten. So you need to remember that when you go into any kind of speaking environment, meeting, everyone's on your side. They're not trying to chew you apart and they want you to do well. So we really need to start getting that piece of our brain under control, because all of those symptoms of fear, the dry mouth, the sweaty palms, the shaking, the sick feeling in your stomach, you know, all of that is coming from these hormones flooding your system. So getting that part of your brain under control can start to calm you down. And so luckily, the way to do that is through your breathing. Once you start breathing slowly and deeply, that completely calms down, sends this message to your brain and controls your nerves. And so this is something we'd go into a lot more in depth usually, but just to tell you that even simple deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, that's how you calm yourself down. And it has to be much more in through your nose than in through your mouth, because breathing through your mouth can set you into a little bit of panic zone. So very much deep breath in through the nose and out through your mouth. And this is a double win, because in terms of public speaking, what it's doing for you is actually helping you with your vocal projection as well. So it's moving a little bit further down. We get that breath in through the nose, but we don't just want to get it into our clavicle here. And a lot of people do that if you tell them to take a deep breath before saying something in workshops. And even if you want to do it there yourselves now, just take a deep breath in. And if you do this, and the shoulders hunch up, what you've done is called clavicular breathing, and it's breathing into your clavicle there. So the breath isn't really going very deep. And actually, it's kind of hard to sometimes do this sitting down. You might be better off standing up, but you want your breath to go all the way down to your diaphragm. So your diaphragm is this muscle which is across under your ribs. And if we look at it in cross section there, it looks like a frown. So what we want to do, if you remember this, is to turn that frown upside down. So if you're breathing really deeply into your diaphragm, it should go from like this to smiley. And it's pushing all that air down. Your lungs will fill with air and it'll push your diaphragm down. Now the diaphragm is a muscle. So if you are breathing out in a really controlled way, you're using your muscle to control that breath. And then you should feel it if you really practice the diaphragmatic breathing, because you'll start to feel that muscle working. If you don't usually work it, it'll take 2 or 3 breaths before you feel it working. So you can try lying down or standing up, but until you feel that muscle working, then you'll know when you're doing diaphragmatic breathing. So doing that will help you expel that breath in a really slow and controlled manner. And that's going to give you really good vocal projection when you're actually back in a room and have to talk to people. So I'd really recommend you do that. Take those deep breaths in and then breathe out slowly, and maybe even counting as you do it up to 4 or 5. And the slower you can do it, you can go from 1 to 2 to 3 breath out, or you can try and keep it going slower and slower so that you're breathing out more slowly over a longer count. And you can go maybe from 4 to 5 to 6 and kind of up your resistance in your breathing like you would if you were training. So go a little bit longer each time. And that will really help you with both nerves and projection. So it's a really good thing. It's just to remember everything comes back to your breath. Another few little quick ways to calm are breathing exercises we've talked about. And just if you're kind of, before you go into something, it can be useful to remember just a few little tricks. So even if you need to run into the loo before a meeting or a presentation, do your breathing exercises. Another good thing is like reflexology pressure points. So you can just press here. And even if you're not exactly sure where the pressure point is, it can be just something that you think of, as in you have a mental connection that when I do this, it reminds me to breathe and it reminds me to calm down. Some people find it handy to maybe wear an elastic band that they kind of pull against their wrist, and that's their little kind of physical signal to calm down. But just pressing between your thumb and your finger there, that can be quite calming, and also just sends that message that you kind of associate with calm. So you'll be like, this is my time to calm down now. I'll do my breathing, and it's kind of all connected mentally and physically for you. The other thing is power poses. So a lot of people would have seen a great TED talk by a lady called Amy Cuddy, where she talks about power poses. And when I think about a power pose, I automatically always think of that kind of 1980s Wall Street executive with their kind of hands up behind their head and their feet on the desk. And so that's a real high status, high authority pose. So when you're doing a power pose, again, this is a run into the loo and work kind of thing. Put your hands on your hips, you puff your chest out, and you put your feet quite widely apart. And then you just do your deep breathing and you feel like that confidence flooding your system. So that can be really helpful as well. And if you do that for a few minutes before something, it can just put you in that confident frame of mind. So I really recommend that as well. Now, before you kind of go into all of this, there are some things that can help you with your actual, how you come across, how credible you seem, how much gravitas, how much kind of personal power and presence that you have. And these are all these kind of non-verbal signals that people take in within 3 seconds of seeing you. They've already made up their mind about you. So before you even open your mouth, it doesn't really matter what you're going to say or how you say it. It is actually how you come across when you walk on that stage or you walk up to, give that presentation. So actually thinking about physically how you come into the room or how you go onto the stage can be really important. So there's lots of things I love around language that are to do with how people perceive you. And it's really interesting the way that things in the English language, and I'm sure other languages as well, kind of are physical descriptions, but are taken as character descriptions. So if you think about someone who's shifty or a bit of a slouch or crooked or spineless, these are all really negative things, but they're actual physical descriptions of how someone's body is. So, you know, you don't want to be described as a slouch. That comes across as lazy, or if you're crooked, you're untrustworthy. So, you know, like that, if you're on a Zoom call or if you're in a meeting, you don't want to be seen to be slouching, because that might give the impression that you are lazy. Or if you kind of have like an asymmetric kind of pose, that might make people think that you're crooked or spineless. So you want to think about these things and keeping yourself upright and straight. Other really kind of positive words then you have like balanced, grounded, level-headed, head straight in your shoulders, gravitas. So it's like putting your feet firmly planted on the ground, you know, really grounding yourself, standing firm. And then things like having a powerful voice. You know, if you actually have a powerful voice, you will be taken maybe a bit more seriously than someone who has quite a reedy or a quiet voice and kind of finds it hard to make themselves heard. So all of these things are really interesting to think about in terms of how someone might describe someone, and then how you can physically kind of embody these things. And I would say that, you know, you want to be comfortable when you're public speaking, of course, but being comfortable can sometimes make you look uncomfortable. So if you are not necessarily comfortable standing up really straight, you kind of have to suck it up and do it anyway, because it makes you look more powerful, more confident, more comfortable with who you are if you're not kind of leaning sideways, if you are standing straight and making that effort. And it will become second nature if you keep doing it. But we can sometimes lean on things literally a little bit too much. So it is really important to think about how you come across physically, because people do look at you and make a snap decision within 3 seconds, they say, I think. So actually bringing it from the very start is very important before you even do your speaking. Another thing then, a lot of people, I always find it's quite funny that, you know, we have these things, our hands on the end of our arms all the time, and 99.9% of the time they don't bother us. We don't really think about them. They just do their own thing. And the minute we have to speak in public, it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do with, I don't know what to do with them. So I think the first thing to really work on, if you're trying to work on your presence, public speaking, is posture and then gesture. So posture is what's creating this solid gravitas, presence. But if you just stand there straight and still and don't move your hands, there isn't a kind of naturalness, fluidity to it. So we want to first work on our posture, and then secondly, bring the hands back. Don't be afraid to use them, but obviously don't go crazy with them either, because I think that can be a little bit distracting for people as well. So it's something that you just have to get used to bringing in slowly. So if you are worried about what to do with your hands, I'd say just keep them down, but don't cross them, don't fidget, don't create a kind of close. If you cross your arms, you can create a very closed off sense, and really want to be interacting, connecting, engaging with your audience. So any closed physical positions, even crossing your legs when you're standing, is kind of stopping that. You want to be open. And you may notice even a lot of people when they first come on stage, or if they're doing a kind of a welcoming speech, they'll do this. I think it's hard to see when I'm on a small screen on Zoom, but they'll do an open-handed gesture to say, welcome everybody. And as they say welcome, they'll do that with their hands. So thinking about being open and fluid is also quite important. Then a little bit about that kind of credibility thing, I think, with the level-headedness we spoke about before. So like I said, we have this posture that's good. We're like a solid T. We have a strong spine because we want to be thought of having a strong spine and not being spineless. We've a good open posture. And then having our chin level can be quite important in a face-to-face speaking situation, because I think I put in this picture of Princess Diana there because I think everyone remembers her famous kind of look, kind of where she tilted her chin down and looked up. And it was a very kind of, oh, poor me, submissive gesture. So if you're trying to be submissive, you would put your chin down. If you're trying to be arrogant and above people, you might look down on them when you're speaking. But if you're trying to be on the level, level-headed, straight up with people, you'll have your head level and be looking straight across at them. The other thing then is when you're speaking to a room, if you turn your whole body away to talk at someone in particular, you're almost leaking your power in that direction. So what is kind of recommended is that you very much are like an owl. You move your head to talk to someone if they've asked you a question, but you don't necessarily shift your whole body around to them. So that turning your head is very important, but it's also very important to actually point your nose in the direction of who you're talking to so that you are looking straight at them, but you don't need to turn your whole body. So it is important to keep your stance, keep your space. Don't leak your power out, keep your personal space, but turn your head and be direct and directly talk to someone who's asked you a question. The other thing I found really interesting, I was, and it's coming up when I've been privately coaching someone, she couldn't figure out why she was kind of felt like she wasn't being listened to in work. I took a video of her speaking and we've noticed straight away it came across, and it's sometimes really interesting to video yourself and see, you'll weed out so many bad habits by doing it. So this is what I would call a listening position. And it shows you're listening. It's internationally recognized, I think, as being listening to people. We kind of cock our head to the side and we're like giving them our ear. But if you're in a meeting and you're listening and then it's your turn to speak, you need to make sure that you put your head straight up before you start speaking. If you start speaking while you're still like this, people are going to cut across you because you aren't physically showing them that you are the speaker now. You're still in the listening position. So that is something I think can trick people or trip people up a lot. And it's just a very simple thing, but it can be quite effective and it really works for that person. So I'm flying through and moving on to how to kind of practice. If you have a speech or presentation, whether it's a wedding speech or a work presentation or whatever, a few little things that you can do. So for general kind of practice, if you do want to improve your level of speaking in a more kind of ongoing practice way, little things you can do, or you can do before you have to give a speech. There are vocal warm-ups like tongue twisters and things like that. So these are things that you say to kind of get all the parts of your speech working. So there are things like red, yellow, leather, red leather, yellow leather. See, tongue twisted already. And like unique, New York. So all of these little phrases get all of the parts of your mouth going. And we often don't really use all of these parts as much as we should, or as kind of with as much clarity of diction as we should. So when you are projecting your voice, you do need to be more mobile in your mouth. And another little good trick is if you find that you aren't being very clear or people struggle with your clarity, is to actually put a pen between your teeth and practice talking with a pen in between your teeth, because it really makes you move your mouth muscles. And I found, I was actually told this when I was studying French in college. So it was very much to get that kind of more French pronunciation. And if you speak a certain language, different languages do different things. So, you know, French people might use parts of their vocal kind of cavity more in different ways than maybe English speakers to Swedish speakers to whatever. So depending on what language you've grown up speaking, you might use different parts of speech more. So doing little kind of tongue twisters, using a pen for clarity, practicing projecting, they can all work. The other thing I'd say, if anyone gets a chance, and I know these things probably aren't happening right now, but one of the best things I ever did in terms of confidence in public speaking was doing an improv class, because improv really challenges you to think on your feet. And I think if you're nervous around public speaking, actually being put into situations where you just have to think and speak really quickly gets you used to it and builds your confidence in it. So look, classes might not be running right now or anytime soon, but you can do little challenges yourself. You can make it a fun game at home. You can, just challenge yourself even to just speak for 2 minutes on a topic you pick out of the newspaper that day or something like that, just to give yourself little challenges and practice, because then you'll see how much you are stumbling, stopping, thinking, going, and all of those things that you need to work on and weed out. So if you film yourself talking about how to cook an egg or my worst ever haircut or something you saw in the newspaper today, whatever it is, it can be as challenging a topic as you like, then you will see how you do under pressure, which can be really helpful. And another really good one is to give yourself 2 minutes with someone sitting opposite you talking. And every time you go, they just put up their hand. So you're physically seeing it's getting flagged every time that you're using one of those filler words, and weeding those out and getting out of that habit can be really powerful in making you sound more fluent, because even if you really know your subject matter, even if you really know what you're talking about, I think that using filler words can make you seem unsure and less fluent. So just getting those out of your speech is really good, because it'll make you seem more fluent. And if you know your topic really, really well, then you want to just extract that from how you come across. So then more specific practice is when you are doing something very specific that you have to do. So speech, presentation, whatever it is. And this very much is for more probably work-related stuff. So I would say that if you have a presentation that you may have to give to your boss, to a few coworkers, at a conference, at another conference, like a few times over, you might have 15 minutes at one thing over a Zoom meeting, but you might have an hour for it at another thing. So even though it's the same topic, you might want to do varying lengths and practice giving it synopsis of it, or giving the greater detail version of it, so that you know the subject matter inside out, but you can talk about it at varying lengths and you've already pulled out the important points. Because if you only have 15 minutes and you go into the great detail version, you're not going to be giving the important points. So it's important to be able to vary how much info you're giving people, how much detail. Then varying your energy level. So again, in these situations, you could very well be in a small room with 2 or 3 people, or you could be in a huge auditorium with 200 or 300 people. So in those situations, you're going to be giving your speech or giving this talk or presentation in a very different way. It could be more intimate, which can be quieter, or it could be, really upping that energy level to 120% with a bit more kids TV presenter jazz hands going on, so that they're getting more from you. You can't give the same speech the same way in a small room and a big room. It has to be higher energy. It has to be more effort in that connection. Another good thing to do, I would say, is to have your bullet points on cue cards if you need that crutch, but try not to use them. Try to speak off the cuff. Try not to learn something off, because if you have a script that you've learned off and you forget where you are in it, or you forget a word, you're sunk. You'll never get back to your script unless you have a prompter off stage. But if you have cue cards that have bullet points that you just go, right, that's the next thing I need to talk about, or you have that on your slides, then you know the topic, you can talk about it off the cuff. That's the best way to be, because then you're not going to lose your place and freeze. If you freeze, then it's too stressful. You have to just be able to talk freely. So scramble up those cue cards, shuffle them, and then pull out a topic at random and just talk about that for your rehearsal practice, because that's giving you that confidence that you can literally, if you threw all your cue cards on the floor and you pick them up, you can jump in there anywhere. And it just makes you feel really confident knowing that you know it inside out and you can pick it up from any point. And if, for instance, you are in that meeting that has to be cut by 15 minutes, but you were expecting to get an hour, then you're able to go, right, well, I can just, ditch this card, this card, this card, and skip over that, but I'm not going to get flummoxed by thinking, oh, I haven't got that bit, and then that bit came after that bit. So being able to just be very elastic around how you present the information can be really helpful. And really rehearsing that is the best way to be that. You can't expect to just naturally get that. It does take some work. So doing a little bit of that can make you feel a lot more confident. And then finally, record. It's the best way to look at yourself and weed out those things, because we don't notice half the things we're doing without seeing ourselves on camera, and it's painful, but it's useful. So when we talk about recording, these 4 stages we talk about, and there's unconsciously incompetent, which is where you're doing it wrong and you don't know you're doing it wrong. Then you video yourself and you become consciously incompetent, where you are still useless, but you've watched the video and now you're really conscious of all the things you're doing wrong. Then you become consciously competent when you work on it. So you're becoming more competent, you're practicing, you're very aware that you're trying very hard and you're making an effort, and you're like, got to do this thing, got to not say that thing, got to hold my body like this, got to not say, you're thinking about it all the time still, but it's working and you're doing well. And then when you kind of practice this enough and you're becoming more confident, you become what they call unconsciously competent, which is the point we want to get to, where you're doing a really good job and you don't even have to think about it. It's automatic. It's like driving a car. You can kind of zone out and you're still doing everything you need to be doing automatically. And so the videoing yourself is completely cringe and awful, and you'll hate it at first, but you have to remember that it's a process and that you go through those 4 stages and you get there in the end. Some of the things to look for if you're doing that, that can really distract from your message. So, you know, you might know your topic inside out. You might be the world expert on it, but if you're presenting it in a sort of kind of way, people are not going to take you as seriously. So looking for all these things, weeding them out and working on them is really good. So some of the bad habits that can really distract people are, we spoke about filler words already. So that's your like so. Racing through the information, which I will absolutely hands admit that I am doing today, but I'm trying to pack a load into this because I know we only have a short time and there's so much in these workshops that I'm trying to give you a good lot of information in this. So apologies for not just do as I say, not as I do. Fidgeting is another one. So, you know, if you're nervous, it's often something like a little tick, like maybe fidgeting with an earring or pushing your hair back, or if you've glasses, pressing them up, or those kind of things can, you know, you don't even notice that you keep pushing your glasses up on your nose, but everyone else is seeing it and kind of like, oh my God, I wish they'd stop doing that, instead of listening. Another thing, if you're on stage or if you're at the top of an office giving a presentation, is pacing back and forth. That can be, you know, quite a nervous pacing if you're nervous, and, you know, it can be used to affect on stage, sometimes to show the passage of time. So, you know, you start over here and you're like, well, 2 years ago, our company was doing this, but now, and then you move and you're like, but now. So moving across your room or your stage can be effective if done thoughtfully and mindfully, but just nervously pacing is showing your nerves and it's distracting for the audience. So just trying to stand still, like we said, feet firmly planted, gives you that gravitas, gives you that calmness and solidity. Freezing, obviously, is freezing up and forgetting where you are. So again, doing that practice where you're very much able to jump into your topic at any point. You know, you get a keyword and you can run with it and talk about that from any point. So that should help you with not freezing and being very much able to kind of fluently talk about the subject or pick it up. If someone gives you a question and you have to jump back in after the question or jump onto a topic they've asked a question about, you're ready to go. Upward inflection is something that has crept in, I think, from watching a lot of American TV, and it's that kind of mid-Atlantic accent that you'll find a lot of people, and certainly a lot of teenagers now, are kind of growing up with, and it's where every sentence kind of sounds like a question. So it's that upward inflection at the end of the sentence where you're kind of, it's like it's a question, but it's not a question. So it's pronouncing a statement as if it was a question. And that can make you sound like you're questioning yourself if you keep making statements that sound like questions. So to be avoided. Vocal fry is another one that anyone who's watched maybe the Kardashians will be familiar with, and it's where your voice kind of goes like this. It's a bit more throaty than that. I think it's more kind of, I don't know. So that kind of fry on your throat, you know, it's basically, it's harmful to your vocal cords. The air isn't moving the way it should over them. So it is damaging to your voice. And if you have a little bit of vocal fry in your voice, it's something to work on, because if you are giving a long talk or a presentation, it's really going to tire your voice out by the end of it. So really breathing deep, getting the diaphragm moving, pushing that air up and out properly over your vocal cords is important. And I think we mentioned earlier the asymmetric posture. So it can look lazy, it can look too relaxed, it can look kind of, yeah, it doesn't give like a kind of like this sort of leaning to the side. It's just, you're not switched on, you're not standing firmly. So again, that's something to look at. Make sure you're standing up straight. And I don't want to sound like your mum saying stand up straight, but essentially it is really important. It just gives you a lot more credibility instantly. And then another one is kind of bobblehead. You know, again, with that level-headed thing, it's very much keep still, use your hands for gesture, but have a very solid base in your body so that, you know, you're breathing, you're calm, and you're solid. So again, if you are videoing yourself and working on things, these are the things that I would recommend that you look at in your videos and to work on. So I spoke plenty about posture. I think that's something you might have noticed me talk about. Also your gestures, so not being too still with your hands, but not putting them into any closed positions. Then your vocal skills, there's absolutely loads we could talk about there that I just don't have time to go into at all. But there are kind of, you know, using your breath more, your pace, your pitch, your articulation, all of these things, very much, you know, modulating your voice, not being too flat, giving it some jazz, some, you know, not being very, very serious with your voice or very kind of monotone, because you have to keep people engaged and you have to keep, you know, that kind of excitement in your voice. And even if it's a very boring topic, you need to be enthusiastic about it. The other thing that I think we probably have kind of forgotten about with Zoom is eye contact. And it's been really tricky, I think, for all of us relearning our eye contact with Zoom, because we're looking at our computer camera instead of looking at people's faces. So I think one of the most challenging things I found definitely around public speaking is the amount of eye contact that you really need to have with the audience. And, you know, you have to do that thing of eyeballing the people in the front row or the second row, the third row. And a really good way to practice this, which we do in workshops, is that you have to go and talk, but during your talk, you have to look at every single person in the room and everyone puts their hand up, and you have to give minimum 3 seconds of eye contact with the person before they put their hand. They'll be counting and they'll only put their hand down when they have had enough eye contact from you. So you have to go around the room and do that to everyone. And it's deeply uncomfortable to practice and it feels weird, but you have to connect and engage with your audience, and it's so important. And I think it's something that it's a great thing to practice in workshops, where you get used to how long that feels of giving that eye contact. Because we tend to kind of just look at someone and go, oh my God, they've got me looking at them, I'm going to look away. Another way of doing it is to say you look at someone when you're starting a sentence, and when you get to a point in the sentence where there might naturally be a comma or a pause or a move on to a new topic, then you would look to the next person and start making eye contact with that person. So it's uncomfortable, but very important. And I think it's something that we're all probably going to struggle a little bit more with when we go back into real life. But again, it is about that human connection and making your points land by engaging with your audience or your, you know, the people in the room. So a little kind of on the day checklist that I like to go through with people when they do have some kind of speaking occasion or event. Little things to think about are, first of all, your clothing. Obviously, depending on what you do or your personal taste, that can vary widely, but I think it's very important to be comfortable, because in terms of not fidgeting, you don't want anything that you're going to be, you know, kind of like pulling at your waistband because it's a little bit too tight, or you can't move and make gestures because your jacket's a little bit tight across the back. So make sure that you are comfortable in your clothing. And again, if you're going to have to stand up to make a speech, if you're female or male that likes to wear high heels, then can you stand in the heels? Are you going to trip over them on the steps up to a stage? All those things. So think about what's going to feel good when you stand up in front of people, and that you're going to feel comfortable in, and not feel like your breathing is restricted if your dress is too tight or something like that. Food and drink, obviously, there are certain things that, professional actors would never eat before going, or singers would never eat before going on stage. Like a lot of people would avoid dairy because it can make them a little bit sinusy or kind of claggy in their mouth. If, fizzy drinks give you hiccups, don't drink a fizzy drink before you have to go and talk to people. All those things. So you might know certain things that your body reacts to avoid. Then obviously it's great to do a recce on somewhere that you have to speak beforehand, so you're comfortable in the environment, that that you're able to work the projector, that your laptop is compatible, all of those things. And then the last little thing is just to do your vocal warm-ups or your power poses or your little relaxation or visualizations beforehand. So get somewhere maybe 10-20 minutes beforehand that you can just pop off and be on your own and do those things if that's going to help you. And then of course, again, on the day, just remember about adapting that energy. So sometimes you might need to kind of mentally get yourself in that zone as well. If you know that you're going on a stage or you're going into a meeting room or whatever it is, that you're getting yourself into the right kind of level of energy to be more up or more intimate, whatever it is. And then again, just connecting with your audience, which is really hard to do on a Zoom when everyone has their cameras off, but projecting your voice, obviously, so everyone can hear you. Holding eye contact, again, can't do that in a Zoom, but I'm just staring at my camera. Eliciting response. So, even if it's an auditorium, you can still ask hypothetical questions. If you feel people are flagging, you can still be like, wouldn't you think? Or, so wouldn't you agree about something? So even if people aren't going to necessarily answer you directly, they might answer it in their minds. So it just gets them back into the conversation again. And then if anyone asks a question, obviously very attentively looking at them and listening to them. And finally, just finishing up, I always say, you don't have to think of a very strong, memorable finish. Sometimes if that's stressing you out and like, I can't think of a way to finish this in a kind of crazy way or something, it's like, it's okay, you don't have to. You can very simply say, thank you very much for listening today. It's been delightful to talk to you. I'm here for questions if anyone has any. And that is enough, because we can tie ourselves up in knots with trying to finish something dramatically, but we can also not want to finish or not know how to and kind of trail off, and that kind of ruins it, because people remember that last bit where you've kind of been confident and on it and talking all the time, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, so I guess that's it. I don't know, I've nothing else. If you've anything, so don't do that. Decide you're finished. Tell everyone very clearly you're finished. Say thank you very much, and that is plenty, but it just gives it a much more clear and strong ending, and then you can take your questions. So with questions, I would always say, just be honest. If you don't know the answer, say you'll fact check and get back to them. And that's a brilliant opportunity to say, look, come over to me at the end. I'll take your email, I'll take your phone number. We can connect on LinkedIn. I'll get back to you with that information, because that's creating connection. You can keep in touch with that person. It might be a business opportunity, it might be a lead. So if you had just kind of, fudged the question and given them some BS answer, they'll call you on it. They'll probably know you weren't being honest with them. They'll think less of you. But if you are actually going, look, not quite sure, but I will get those numbers and I will give them to you, then you've possibly created a new business connection or a lead from that. So I think that's a much more positive spin on it. And I have that picture of Leo Varadkar there, because I thought that he was on the Late Late Show during the first lockdown, and he'd literally obviously just come from a meeting about new restrictions, got asked a question, clearly had only been briefed on it in the car over to the TV studio, and was trying to remember all these new facts, figures, details. And he didn't try and fudge it. He went, we've literally just had this meeting an hour ago. I'm just going to take out the piece of paper and tell you all what you want to know in detail because it's here. And I think that's a much better way to be. And I personally respected him for that. It was like, good on you. Don't be afraid to actually fact check and give people the real information. And he couldn't get back to people later. He was on, you know, Friday night, just after a meeting, and people were dying to know what the latest was on lockdown. So he gave them the information they needed at that time. And that is always a better way to be. So little key takeaways for you, an action plan, and we can send this around after. If you want to really rehearse and improve your public speaking, I would say, number one, we've all got a smartphone in our pocket, and it is the most useful thing you own. So record yourself. If you have a little tripod, you can set it up on, or prop it up against a glass or something, and just record yourself, even speaking for 2 minutes on, you know, how to cook an egg, or something to do with your work, or your kind of elevator pitch about your business. Examine your personal style. Are you in a very serious job? Are you in a very kind of creative industry? Do you need to be more serious? Do you need to be more creative or exciting? Or how do you need to come across, and are you coming across that way? Then weed out all your ums, ahs, likes, so's, fidgets, posture issues, all of these things. Work on your little skills. Rehearse if you do have something coming up. And if you don't have something coming up, my challenge to you would be to create an opportunity for yourself to do some public speaking, whether that be offering to give a toast at somebody's leaving do, whether to do a speech at a wedding, whether it is to give a presentation that nobody else wants to give. You know, challenge yourself and do these things. And every time you do it, it will become easier and you will improve. So if you do want to get in touch with me for any reason, here are all of my contact details. And we'll send those around later. But thank you very much. And if you'd want to leave a review on Facebook, also, that would be great. You can get me at Speak Up Club Ireland. So thank you very much, all of you. And if anyone has any questions now, I'd be delighted to take them. Just going to have a little look in the chat because I see there are. Okay, so one message there saying, tips for remaining focused while delivering a speech and avoid brain freeze, and how do you come back from a brain freeze? So I'm not sure at what point you asked that question, but I definitely think it's a little method I've developed called the elastic speaker method, and that was to do with, you know, jumping in at any point on your cue cards. So if it's a speech, again, like I know people, if it's a speech, people are more likely to kind of learn off the speech, but definitely, you know, if you're worried, bring cue cards, bring bullet points, and again, just try and mix it up, try and jump in at different points. I mean, remaining focused, I think you have to remain focused because you've got an audience of faces looking at you, and it's very hard to keep talking and start daydreaming at the same time. But, you know, the best way to come back from a brain freeze, if it does happen, is to be honest. I think that people are on your side. So if you genuinely just freeze up, don't know what you're talking about, don't know where you are, just say to people, sorry, I forgot where I was there, lost you for a minute, and just kind of just breathe slowly, don't panic, because the more you start going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, the less likely you are to get back where you were. Or you could even make a joke of it and be like, was anyone listening? Does anyone actually remember what I was saying right then? If it's a kind of a situation where you can be a bit more less formal and more jokey about it. But then, yeah, if you have bullet points on your note cards, at least you can kind of get back to them. And if you have slides, it's a little bit more tricky with a speech, I suppose. But I mean, I definitely always have some notes with you as a crutch, even if you don't use them, because you never know when you will. And it just gives you that comfort to have them there. Thank you. I'm glad you appreciated my Valley Girls vocal fry. Any good tips for a wedding speech? Well, congratulations, firstly. And I think that I was actually just talking about this with my brother last week, and he had given a best man speech, and he said at the time he'd never really been to weddings, and he didn't know what was expected and it still kind of preys on his mind how bad he was at it. And he was thinking that, you know, we should just hire out professional actors to be best men, and that they can give a really great speech, but, you know, and that takes pressure off everyone else. But he is thinking of setting up that service if you want to engage him. But I'd say for a wedding speech, I think that, you know, you can really get bogged down in the thank yous. That's always a bit dull when there's like 100 thank yous to say. And so that can be quite long, getting through all those. So I think concertining the thank yous into as short a space as possible can sometimes be good, because it just lets you get on to kind of maybe more personal things or more kind of heartwarming things. And I would say, you know, it's hard enough to stand up and public speak when you're not used to it, without standing up and public speaking if you're not used to talking about emotional things. And I think as Irish people, we're not great at that sometimes. So I don't envy it, but I'd say certainly really think about coming from a kind of an authentic, I hate that word, but, you know, really authentic and place of your heart, and on kind of an honesty, and maybe say some things that you wouldn't normally say, you know, in front of people that are kind of more emotional, I suppose, things, because essentially that's what really, with a wedding speech, it's a very personal and emotional kind of event. So I'd go, maybe it might surprise people to hear you talk more emotionally, but I think that will be very memorable for people. And I suppose you have to remember, especially if you're the groom, that, you know, your wife is going to remember that for the rest of her life, and you will get a lifetime of goodwill from saying lovely things about her. So you really can't say enough nice things about your wife, probably. And don't be afraid to inject a little bit of humor in it, but also be very careful about humor that could offend, because also your wife will remember that for a lifetime as well. So, so another question there is tips on handling questions in the middle of a presentation and avoiding going down a rabbit hole. So number one tip is, if you kind of feel like it can throw you off to have to take questions in the middle, be very clear at the start that you don't want questions in the middle. Say to people, so I'm going to run through this presentation and then we'll take questions at the end. And, you know, obviously on something like this, you've been putting questions in on the chat, which is great, because when I have my slides on screen share, I actually couldn't see the chat. So that automatically makes all the questions wait till the end. But certainly in a real life situation, if I didn't want them and I felt like it was going to kind of throw me off my game, I would make it very clear at the start that, you know, in a nice way, obviously, that, you know, we'll just take questions at the end. And if you don't mind, maybe write them down and ask me at the end. And I'll just go through the presentation first before I take any. But if anyone does, you know, give you a question at the end and it's kind of unavoidable to stop them saying it, you can say, I will be getting to that in a few slides, so we'll deal with it then. Or you can say, thanks for your question, we'll take it at the end, we'll discuss it in more detail at the end. Or if you have to kind of tackle it, just keep your calm, look at where you are, look at your bullet points and go, right, even make a mark on your note cards where you are, so you kind of remember where you are. And then you can kind of tackle the question briefly and say, look, we can go into it further detail later, or it's going to be dealt with at a later point in the presentation. And then, you know, just quickly go into it. Or again, do that thing of, let's connect on LinkedIn, let's swap numbers, let's swap emails, let's actually have a coffee and a meeting about it some other time, if it's something you think that might be actually useful to make that connection with, because then, you know, you can always set up a meeting with that person, and that might be something that you want to do as well. Yeah. So thanks. I think that's all the questions so far, unless anybody has anything else.
Thanks so much, Deanna. That was excellent. And I hope you won't mind if I share your details with our attendees, and we can connect you guys. So at least if there are any questions post-event, the guys can reach out. Yeah. But thanks so much for jumping on, and hopefully we'll be able to do a really great in-person workshop in autumn with you in Glandor.
That would be amazing. And thanks everyone coming. As I said, don't talk as fast as I do when you're doing anything. And I'll send Sarah on all the slides so if she wants to share them with you as well.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, guys. Cheers for joining us. Bye.